Welcome to Breezin with Bierman, the podcast, part of the Princetonian Now Media Group. As always, our aim is to educate, inform, entertain, and tell you, my people, what is trending. If you like what you hear on Breezin with Bierman, the podcast, listen to us on SoundCloud, Spotify, Apple, iTunes, soon to be New Pod City based in Trenton, YouTube, and many, many more social media platforms. Today's guest is a psychiatrist. He was educated, I can't pronounce this completely right, University something. Yes, you say it.
Universita di Bologna.
And so,
Bologna, Italia.
I think you graduated in 1963.
I got a lot of my training, further training, in specialization in psychiatry at Montefiore Hospital in the Bronx and Albert Einstein College of Medicine.
In New York City.
In New York, yeah. That's
and you're based in Princeton, New Jersey. You specialize in child and adolescent psychiatry, among other things.
Child, adolescent, and forensic psychiatry, which is, one of my major interests right now. Actually, I've had some very interesting experiences actually in that particular area. We might want to talk about that.
Actually. Sure.
Yeah, we'll talk about that too, because I had a very important case that was just settled in forensic psychiatry. A murder case.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
We talk about that first. We're flexible here.
Okay.
Sure.
I can't go too much. I mean, it's fairly public, so there's nothing. I don't want to get too much into names, but it had to do with someone who murdered two people. A young man who murdered two people. I'm not going to go into the specifics of it because he would be I think he's sensitive about anything related to him.
I would imagine, yeah.
So I won't say who they were or what their relationship with him was, but he murdered two close relatives. The question was he mentally ill, insane, or incompetent? And New Jersey, the Supreme Court had recently had a similar kind of case that sort of was similar to the circumstances surrounding his case. And this, I would imagine this would be one of the first times, or this actually would be a very unique case, but it could be related to something that New Jersey Supreme Court had decided upon, which we thought may have been similar. And it went on for 4.5 years, and it went back and forth, and it revolved around the question of competency. Competency is a very interesting concept in the criminal justice system. And it's very easy to find somebody competent as far as criminality.
What they have to know they did something wrong? I mean, where's
I mean, well, there's a number of questions that they have to answer according to a statute. Like they have to know what a judge is, what a jury is. It's very rudimentary, actually. It's so rudimentary that it doesn't require much to be competent, which is really the case. So people who could be very mentally ill very rarely are found incompetent.
Right. Do you think that's unfair, or is that, you think they should revise these statutes?
I was thinking after this case that I wanted to, do some research, maybe write a book or something, or an article, maybe a book, on the whole issue of competency. There is something that I researched. It was about 80 pages long on the internet, which they talk about it. But I think that there are many problems in ascertaining who's competent. You could have competency, for example, in areas of guardianship and things, but criminal competency and what constitutes someone who's competent in terms of a crime is really very difficult. And can I say this? It's really, and people don't like to hear these things. It's stacked against the defense.
Right.
We really have a lot of constitutional issues that are great and wonderful, and there are those that, I'm not a lawyer, but I do this kind of work, and I think that there are certain things within the system that sometimes, and it's an unpopular view, but people who commit crimes a lot of times don't have much of a chance.
Yeah.
If they really have an adequate defense. I mean, I've worked both for the prosecutor as an expert witness, and now for many years I've been working for the public defender.
Mm-hmm.
When I first walked into the public defender's office, the head of the public, it was in Somerville, and the then public defender said to me, "Welcome doing God's work."
Mm-hmm.
You know, and anyway, this particular case went on for 4.5 years, and initially the person was found competent.
Competent.
Yeah. And then
But back up though, were you working for the public defender in this case, or were you an objective forensic psychologist offering an opinion?
I was brought into the case for the public defender originally. You know, I knew all the actors, and I mean, I've worked for the particular office, in, for years. This one particular office, among others, but I've done the predominant amount of my work with this particular public defender's office. They know me and they rely a lot upon me. So in this particular case, it went, to make a long story short, it sort of went back and forth about whether the person, it was a young man, was competent or not. And it finally came down to a hearing. He had been found competent, first incompetent by one judge. And what they do is, if you're found incompetent, you're sent to a place called Anne Klein, which is a forensic center in Trenton State. And there they teach you to be competent. I mean, they actually—
So you could be tried and then sent to prison.
So you could get tried, yeah. In other words, say someone is on medication, you know, and he commits a crime and he's mentally ill, and you know, there are questions of his or her competence. So they send them to Anne Klein, the prosecutor. You know, will say, well, or you could request it as part of your defense that you want the person also to go to the center. So they actually have a program that's called competency instruction. And they can actually, work, say, a month, 30 days, and they put somebody on medication, or they change their medications, or they give them psychotherapy, or they have group or certain psychologists who work for them. It's sort of a whole system. And they always find them competent. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's sort of a strange—
Catch-22 and counterintuitive.
Yeah, it's a paradox. I mean, you know, someone's incompetent, you make them competent so that they can go stand trial. You know, and I would imagine that part of this is the process to make sure that people get punished. Our system is one of punishment.
Right. It seems like old-fashioned puritanical.
You know, right. The system is a punitive system.
Right.
You know, with jails are filled. And that's another one of my big themes, that negative reinforcements do not work. I mean, jails are perfect examples of negative reinforcement. You know, if you have positive reinforcements, this is a psychological theory, you know, and people bat this back and forth, you know, but basically negative jail is punishment, negative reinforcement. And the fact that there's recidivism proves, you know, that it doesn't work.
Right.
You know? And so basically that's what happens. Can you imagine someone's incompetent, say, or they're totally, you know, mentally ill.
And they commit a gruesome crime when they're mentally ill and all that.
And they get taught to be competent by answering questions like, what is a judge? Oh, a judge is this, what's a jury? You know, and they basically go through a learning process. In fact, this came out in the trial, you know, in the motion, where the judge actually talked about parroting, that this particular person was so smart.
It's like teaching to the test, though.
He was able to parrot the issues around competency, but I was able to undermine that. Not that the judge was favorable in understanding. I was able to undermine, so to speak, that argument that just because you parrot something, you know what a judge is, and there were particular issues that were brought up in the case that showed that this person was incompetent.
What did this guy need, though? He really needed just to stay at a nice psychiatric center.
That's it. See, the question is, someone like this person was completely mentally ill, and he's got to be, no matter what. So some people think you can cure mental illness, or you can, you know, have someone go into a remission, you know, or they somehow could function in society. So he was able to, with medication, some medication, and, you know, a number of the psychiatrists actually said, when he was in the unit, he functioned. He ate, he talked to people, you know, under the medication. but with the stresses or the particular aspects of going to a trial, he really couldn't do those things, or he had to be medicated, particularly every day. And the key question was, he really couldn't cooperate because of his mental state. I won't go too deeply into it, with his attorney. And that was one of the major points of his being incompetent, because he was able to say what a judge was, what a jury is. He talked about proceedings in the court. He was highly, highly, highly intelligent.
Right.
And in fact, in the decision, the judge talked about that. So someone who's very, very smart, actually, though very, very mentally ill, could be adjudicated competent because of the high level of intelligence. In fact,
That is punitive. But it's so punitive. So then you send them to a regular prison where you just get worse.
Yeah, well, in fact, the public defender, who's the head of the public defender office, sent me a letter after the judge ruled on his case, thanking me because of what I did and he did, how we worked together, we're dedicated to this person. A horrible crime. But the major part, he won't have to spend the rest of his life in a state prison versus being in a hospital, where he at least he has profound mental illness, you know, and he'll be able to be in a hospital, and he'll never get out. I mean, or it's unlikely that he'll get out in a short period of time. The public thinks these people, these guys or men or women get away with it, you know, and they don't. I mean, I've had cases who've been in 30 years, you know, people who've been mentally ill, who the criteria being, are they dangerous?
Right.
So what will happen if you commit a horrendous crime? You're always going to, you know, most of the time, it'd be very rare that two psychiatrists might say you're not dangerous anymore. Though it does happen. It does happen. I've had.
Right. I think the fact is, in this country, where everything is, we're going to get to organization. We have about 8 minutes. Like in Sweden, it's a homogeneous country. They'll take someone like that. They're interdict. If someone has mental illness, they get help earlier than later, and they stay in one place and they don't get out. In this country, we have so many state, federal, local, and the resources and the political will. It's a mess. A lot of the cops say what they hate about their job is dealing with homeless, mentally ill people and stuff. And they're just out there. And we use our prisons to house them. And things
it's very complex. But if you talk about serious crimes, for example, if a person who's mentally ill and claims insanity as a defense and goes before a jury, my understanding from what I learned, and it was told to me by one of the public defenders, that they have never won a case since 1987.
Jesus.
Yeah. You know, but before judges, I mean, sometimes it's advantageous. There's all kinds of ways to use the justice system. So, and one of the things that a lot of lawyers will tell if there is an insanity plea is to make sure you have a trial. I forget what they call it. Before a judge. You know, and never go before a jury, because you just will not achieve your, as a defense piece, you'll never achieve your desired result. I mean, I have had cases where I was called in once. It was undecided between the defense and the prosecutor about a woman who had killed her child, you know, and the hospital felt that after about 10 years, I think, that she could be released. And it was very difficult to, you know, to get her out. So I was called in as an impartial, you know, expert, you know, and examined the case. Sometimes they'll do that, you know, when they can't decide between the prosecutor and the defense. You know, I've had several cases like that where I'm called in by the court, you know, in other words, not representing any side or not being part of a team, the prosecutor's team or the defense team. I mean, the job is to do it medically and you know, ethically, you know, and not be bought off, you know, like a hired gun.
Right.
Which a lot of psychiatrists are told they're just you know, hooers or hired guns. You know, I've always felt, at least I feel that's not my role, and I've tried you know, to be as objective as possible. And the judge in the case that I talked about really respected. He really commented about that he respected my credentials and my opinions, usually. which went a long way.
But are you trained how to talk to a judge, the legalese, the verbiage, the terminology?
I'm grandfathered as a forensic expert. In other words, when I started, I was a professor at the UMD and at Rutgers Medical School, and I ran the adolescent unit. And for some reason, my name, some lawyers got my name, you know, and I started working in this in the 1970s. They now have programs where they have fellowships in forensic psychiatry, where you have to take.
Yeah, because that's my question. Some forensic psychiatrists don't know how to explain things in layman's terms to a jury, to a judge, to a lawyer.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, I always feel the way I talk, you know, I've been trained analytically, and it depends. Like I've used, you know, psychobabble words. Depends upon the judge. I mean, in this particular case, in fact, I've appeared before this judge several times, and I have used technical type of language. You know, and the judge seems to have, but I think for the most part, you're better off as an expert trying to address the lowest possible denominator, you know, in terms of being able to have people under, and the same thing would go with a jury, you know. Juries are the same, you know, we are all potential jurors, you know, and it would be a bell-shaped curve. I mean,
it's safe to go to the lowest common denominator. I have to interrupt. We only have 4 minutes left.
Yeah,
we're gonna have to have you on again.
Adam, we live in a society of mediocrity.
Well, I think, but I would err on the side of mediocrity, and also we don't always have the best verbal comprehension either, and vocabulary. We only have, God, for 3 minutes. Time went fast, and I'm going crazy. We have to have you on again. Let's do two voices from the crowd. That's questions I get from the street, and see if you can answer them in about 45 seconds left. Hope don't cause a lot of stress. The pandemic and mental health. What can people do to stop the exacerbation of neurosis, psychosis during this pandemic and isolation?
Here's my take on it. Like, as far as my experience with patients, let's call it, have a certain level of anxiety or problems. The pandemic is just an added piece. The same thing would go with let's call them normal. People have stress and so forth in their lives. The pandemic has added a piece to that. And I think these pieces have to be recognized. Right. People are not going to recognize them. They're tossing off the pandemic, and there are different, you know, parts of I'm in Florida now. You wouldn't know in certain places that there's a pandemic. I mean, you know, go up at certain other, but Florida even is divided. You know, I go into one public supermarket, everyone's wearing a mask. I go into another type of supermarket, and nobody's wearing a mask. So a public awareness of the reality of the pandemic is going to be very hard. I think right now there's an attempt to bring home these differences, and to, you know, I've always said we have to, you know, you talk to people and just even casually, we can't be divisive. I mean, I think unfortunately it's become a political problem, not a psychiatric problem, social problem. It has to become recognize that there are psychiatric problems.
Do you think if people have less anxiety, though? Let's say the vaccination program works, and now we have the $1 trillion stimulus plan. I've just got a warning, 1 minute warning. Do you think that lessen anxiety will maybe lessen a little bit of the polarization?
Well, I got vaccinated. I felt less anxious. I mean, and everyone I speak to, there's a feeling of relief. That being said, I think there are still, you know, factors that not everybody's going to get vaccinated, right. You know, and therefore the anxiety levels are going to continue. I think there has to be attention paid to, and the word you use, anxiety, feeling of fear. You know, I think when the pandemic, you know, really blew up, fear is an enormous motivating factor in terms of.
We have to end with that. This has been Breezin with Bierman, the podcast, a Princetonian Now Media Group production. We have Dr. Martin Weinapple. We're going to have to get you back, doctor, if you'll come back. Because
there are a few other things I wanted to talk about. Like
you're fascinating. And I mean, I just let you talk. I think you give so much information. Well, thank you very much. And we'll be back next week.
Okay. Ciao.